Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining me for another episode of Get Out of Rat. Today, I'm very lucky to be joined by Jonathan Gale, the CEO of Sabio. Jonathan, thanks very much for joining me today.
Thanks, Martin. It's a pleasure to be here. Genuinely, I'm actually in the office. One of two people in an office. It seats about 200. So, but from my point of view, it's a more COVID secure environment than my house. So got a lot more people coming and going. So
I can absolutely relate to that. I'm really looking forward to finding out more about you and Sabio is such a well-known company and brand in our industry, but really kind of going in and having a look at what makes you guys different, what your views are. I'm really looking forward to it. So Thanks very much. I think everyone is always very interested. To start with, how have you got here today? What's been your kind of career path?
Sure. It's a funny one. It's a small world. I think you know from this industry, it's a pretty small kind of industry. I'm talking specifically contact center. CRM, that's another thing. Customer experience, digital transformation, AI, etc. That's another thing. But I think obviously at the core of what Sabio do is expertise around contact centers and customers that have got a big contact center as part of their kind of service delivery mix and their service delivery model. And Sabio's, I'm guessing, about a 20-year-old company now. And bizarrely, I was in the room when the company was named.
Really?
Yes, because one of the founders was somebody that I went to college with and did a degree with, and I actually worked with him at a company called Touchbase before, which latterly became another company in our space called Natilic now, or it's evolved into Natilic, I should say, in case I offend anyone at Natilic. I didn't mean to do that. For one reason or another, I didn't. So, that kind of segues into explaining my kind of career. So, me and this chap, Ken Hitchin, and another chap, friend of mine called Tim Fenn, who's at Pega now, we all started this job at Mercury. And then from there, via the odd little kind of detour, we ended up at this company called Touchbase, and then decided that we felt that there was this real opportunity around contact center and around some of the emerging technology, like leading technology vendors, like Lucent, which became Avaya, and Verint, and a real requirement for kind of mid-sized companies who wanted to understand all of the art of the possible across contact center, across customer experience, across kind of insight and analytics, and they weren't necessarily going to get that support or that breadth of capability from going direct to a vendor, and that was so that idea of knowledge and expertise and almost knowing more about the customer's problems and knowing more about the actual systems and solutions than the vendors was kind of at the if you excuse the pun, it's not deliberate, but was kind of at the genesis of Sabio. And Sabio, as I found out that morning when it was on the list of suggested names for the company, is, I don't know if are you familiar with what it means or where it comes from?
No, I'm not.
So it's actually a Portuguese saint, but in Portuguese it's the equivalent of saying sage or wise. It's a word that's,
I love that.
It's a great name, and but I didn't end up being part of that founding group for reasons I won't bore you with. Some my decision, some not my decision, and I actually went in a different direction. I went off to work for BT for their consulting arm in Concordia, which was focused on big contact centers. I've basically been in contact center, CRM, CX my whole career, except for a kind of 8-year stint in SaaS security with a company called Message Labs, which one or two of your viewers may have heard of, which was a UK-based company that became a global security email scanning company that sold to Symantec in about 2008 now. So between 2000 and 2008, I was there, but everything else from kind of far earlier than I want to admit, through to now, has been in kind of contact center, customer experience, digital transformation, CRM. So yeah, and I've kind of flitted around between management roles and, you know, running product teams. And then the last 2 jobs have been running a company called New Voice Media, which is a cloud contact center as a service thing that was, I think it's about 25 people when I joined, and we grew that. We focused on a relationship with Salesforce, which was this startup that no one had heard of, had about 100 employees in the UK when we started working with them.
There's a theme developing here.
Yeah, and we grew that, and that sold to a company called Vonage, US company, and in about 2018, 2019, and actually Vonage, just I don't know if you saw, they got acquired by Ericsson about a week ago, 2 weeks ago, and then I took a year and a half off, as you do, not really a kind of midlife crisis, more a kind of bucket list ticking exercise.
Oh, great.
Yeah, it was great. And one of the things I did was actually cycle around Europe with some friends.
Oh, really?
I know you wouldn't believe it to look at me, but we went about 4,000 kilometers all the way from France through Spain to Portugal, and kind of
wow.
back around. And while I was on that trip, I got a call from somebody, and they said, "Oh, there's this company." And anyway, like you do, you get calls about stuff. And they described the company. I said, "Oh, that's Sabio, isn't it?" And they said, "How do you know that?" And I was like, "I just, it's a guess, but I know this industry and what you're describing, and the brand proposition around expertise and knowledge. That's my guess is it's Sabio." And then there you go. And that was summer 19 or autumn 19. And then I started here in December 19. So just a couple of years ago, just over. And then obviously, we all know what's happened in the last 2 years. So it's been a weird time to take on a new job, but
I can imagine. I mean, literally that was kind of just at the start, wasn't it? Because it was March.
I think the first lockdown was kind of March 2020, but the storm clouds were brewing. I was away with the family, with our friends in the Feb half term, and one of the family friends is a doctor, an intensive care specialist. He was like, "This isn't going to be good." So,
yeah,
and we kind of came back from France, and then that's just, well, and I believed that we were maybe, like everybody, I guess, on the other side of it, and looks like we're not quite yet, and it's just been unimaginable, really. Like if you wound the clock back. Sorry, I know we're not really talking about.
No, I carry on. There's so many different things we could go from what you've said, but I'm like you. The other day, it's just kind of strange. It's strangely affected time, hasn't it? Your concept of time.
No, it's like time stood still. I mean, I don't know about you, but on my smartphone, because I don't have a camera anymore. I just I do, but I never get it out of the cupboard. I use my smartphone, so I tend to think of things, and so I'm flicking through my photos trying to find things. And I used to be able to remember like months and years even. And now I thought, when was that? I can't remember. Was that 12 months ago? Was it 6 months ago? Was it 18?
Yeah.
So if that's what you mean, like I really...
Yeah, no, completely. Someone was talking to me the other day. I actually met my wife just at the same time, December 19. Someone was talking about that. And I missed out a whole year. Of our time together.
That's not a good start.
No.
I'd fix that problem quickly.
I will.
But I do think it's interesting in terms of what we do, and particularly if you think about contact centers. Obviously, overnight things changed, and whereas people's contact centers they're important anyway.
Yeah.
But overnight, they became the only way that a lot of brands had of communicating with their customer base, because they couldn't see them in they couldn't go to a store anymore. They couldn't go find them in a couldn't have a, couldn't go to John Lewis and meet somebody from John Lewis, get that brand experience that they work so hard on, so it was all, or suddenly it was all about the contact center. Everything was going through the contact center. You wanted to speak to a human from one of these companies, you were phoning them up, sending an email or doing a live chat session or whatever. So I mean, obviously we had customers in verticals that would like travel, that would kind of, that was a different problem because they were mothballing everything, and it was what do you do, and loads of difficulty there. And then we had, we saw other, we managed a number of big retail brands in the UK and across retail, including on kind of the grocery side. And their volumes just overnight leapt to kind of 1.5 times peak volume they'd ever seen before, and then they just stayed there. So they were like there, and they just went bang, like with calls, emails, everything, and then they just didn't drop off. They just stayed there. So we were working with loads of different customers who were just trying to cope with that, and also that puts huge amount of stress on the representatives, on agents, on people basically as well. So it's been a bizarre time. And then also things, I mean, obviously I know your background includes long stints with big financial services players, and those operations, those contact centers, which have typically been in offices and got a very tight security model in terms of the data, that having to help those companies figure out how they can move that into a home working model almost overnight. It's been a strange, bizarre period, and again, it's just also accelerated a load of trends that we've seen: adoption of public cloud technology, stuff like that, adoption of AI and automation. I think all of those things have probably moved 10 years in 2 years because of the kind of the pandemic and the external environment.
When you think about you guys, and especially kind of your stewardship, right? So you take over, and then this hits, and you're there supporting your customers in unprecedented times, doing unprecedented things with their volumes and your ability to kind of meet them and service them. How, when you think about where Sabio's come from and where you're heading towards, has it also accelerated that as well, or has it influenced your kind of, where do you want Sabio to be? What does it mean in the future?
It's a really good question. I think it has helped some aspects of what we've done, and it's hindered others, I would say. I don't know how much you know about the recent history of the company, but obviously what we wanted to do was to diversify our offering, because we already were working with some market leading capabilities. But I mean, fundamentally, we're focused on a very specific profile of customer, and that's probably it's likely to be a client of ours who's got a lot of consumers, a lot of customers that they're managing either directly or via some sort of distribution channel or something. So it's generally not always like we have companies that don't fit this mold and that we have great relationships with. Sorry, I've got to turn off my email, which is bonging every 2 seconds. The dangers of podcasts. Right, that's not that.
It's fine.
Oh. And can you hear the bonging?
Yes, but it's a common backdrop to the podcast, so don't worry.
I assume we'll take this bit out, but it's driving me absolutely insane. I quit Outlook, the application that doesn't want to switch off.
Yeah, that one doesn't. That cannot be turned off.
Well, let's see if that. So, so we got this, particular kind of profile of customer where I think there's almost the best fit, and there's a complexity. Usually, there's, where we really like to operate is where the solution, like creating a simple solution that's a good experience for all the stakeholders, for the customer, for our client, the people that work for our client in their contact centers, is a nice, simple, joined up solution, but we're actually delivering that is really hard. So we focus on expertise in a broad range of areas, both in terms of issues and processes around contact center, customer experience, CRM, digital transformation, etc. AI is obviously a big part of that now, and expertise on the solution side around what we consider to be kind of the best possible range of vendors that you can work with across those spaces. And then we have quite a lot of our own intellectual property, our own products, but they are generally about rapid deployment, about simple monitoring and management of quite complicated integrated solutions, and they're about driving insight. Primarily they're about driving insight, whether that's interaction in analytics, whatever, but things that we can then use to work with customers to improve the customer service that they deliver and the customer experience that the customer journey that their customers go on. So yeah, if I think about the effect of the pandemic and all of that, so we got, fairly early on in my tenure, we kind of figured out, okay, what we really need to add some more capability in a number of these emerging areas, including AI and automation, including some newer kind of CCaaS and CPaaS vendors, including CRM, because typically you don't tend to find many technology partners who operate with credibility in the CRM space, but also operate with credibility in the CC space. And as those two markets, something we'll probably talk about later, but as those two markets converge, offering often what look like on the face of it totally substitutional rather than complementary solutions, that you can do it through your CRM, or you can do it through your contact center. Like, well, how do you want to do this? And for the profile of customer that we want to work with, we want to help them try and solve that problem, because there usually isn't a single right answer. It depends on what the requirements are. So I think the thing about the pandemic for us was some people chose to kind of completely understandably, but to, if you like, be cautious in terms of, right, we'll batten down the hatches, we'll get through, and then hopefully when we get the other side of this, we'll go back to normal. And so I think we made a conscious decision that we were going to look to be quite aggressive in terms of growth, both organically and inorganically in terms of acquisition targets for us, so that when we hopefully came out of the other side of it in a year or two's time, we'd built quite an impressive array of capabilities and expertise across a broad set of technologies and a broad set of areas and processes and areas of specialization within the CX landscape. And so we nearly doubled in size in terms of our headcount, our customer base, and we brought together some amazing capabilities and amazing skills and amazing people. So that's all good, and we could definitely do more of that, because one of the things that you could do realistically was you could be acquisitional in lockdown, because the market was actually, it was there, but there were quite a few people were out of it because they were sitting still. So it was quite a good time to, if you were clear about your strategy and knew what you wanted to do. The problem though is the people side of it. So getting, acquiring companies is one thing. At the same time, we hired organically 200 or 300 people, in that period.
Wow.
But then bringing everybody together, and making that, knitting that together into one integrated, harmonious, company proposition, set of processes, that's the thing that in lockdown and remotely is a lot harder to do. It's not impossible. Use of technologies, collaborative technologies like this, we're having to learn to do it. But I would say the positive was we could execute our strategy quickly, and the market has been accelerating, or the pandemic has been a catalyst for certain overall shifts, the changing role of agents, the role of AI and automation, the need for our customers to be incredibly smart at how they segment their customer data. The role of AI and automation in that, just the general shift to the cloud, like those things which we try to differentiate and build value propositions around and be better at helping our customers around than our competition. Those things have all accelerated, which is great. But the pulling everything together, getting, becoming one cohesive team, and the work social side of it. I mean, I think it's not until you take that away that you realize how important that is as part of building culture and building understanding between teams, between people, teams that are often geographically dispersed as well. So, those get-togethers, those annual kickoffs, those quarterly meetings, when you can't do those physically, it's difficult. So I'd say it's been very much a mixed bag for us. I think we've stuck to our plan, and we've pursued our strategy and been to a certain extent opportunistic, but it's difficult. I find that it's difficult, and I think sitting in this office here in London, and I don't know what the office holds, probably 120 people or something, and 3 weeks ago it was 80-90 people, like it was nearly back to normal.
Yeah.
And today there's me and one other person in it, and that I get that, that's the government advice. I've come in because I had to come in to meet clients earlier in the day who wanted to meet in the office, same as my colleague, but everybody else is home. That's the advice. It's obviously the sensible thing to do. But it's just a shame. Like, I was really, really enjoying, and that, I mean, these are all, let's be clear, unbelievably first world problems we're talking about, because this has obviously killed.
Oh, I think it's very relatable.
Permanently affected the physical and mental health of literally millions of people. So, I mean, I think it's a good thing to always kind of check yourself on, is to go, yeah, okay, we're complaining that we can't integrate and we can't do that, but this is it's a global pandemic and it's killing people and devastating families. Anyway, I always feel better about it. I always not feel better. I feel it's like a good slap around the face to, like, stop moaning about not being able to get together.
I still think you can moan.
Not as far and away, not the most important thing that the world is dealing with at the moment.
I still think you can moan. Much like you mentioned, your friend's a doctor. My sister's a paramedic and has been right on the front lines of this. And I have to stop when we're together and I'm kind of moaning about something similar, I can just see a side eye in me. So it's I would say though, if I was in Sabio, I would be reassured to hear the CEO talk about wanting to make, just you being conscious of the fact that there's a lot of the strategy that's being realized and there's a lot of great things happening, but you're really conscious of not wanting to make sure that the essence of what your company is, that the new hires and the people who have only had some kind of remote experience, virtual experience, that you're considering them. And it's kind of like, right, let's think about this group of people. How do we ensure that they really understand who we are as a community and as a company? I would be reassured by that.
Well, that's good to hear. I hope that's reflected. Sorry, we've got energy saving light sensors. Get my there we go.
There we go.
Back on.
You mentioned something really interesting there as well about, and I think it's kind of a view held in the market of where you guys sit, and that is really understanding that convergence that you mentioned of contact centers, CRM, AI. What does that look like for you? That landscape, and how is it evolving, and do you think it will evolve?
Yeah, I mean, I think I think there's multiple ways of looking at or thinking about that convergence, but that convergence is real because it's the effect of market forces, it's the effect of competition. There is a certain, well, there's a few things, right? Let me back up a second. I think one of the interesting things is this overall trend that we're seeing moving away from the contact center being seen as a cost center and
which
it's
is
been
nice.
a profit center and part of bringing customers in, keeping customers happy, stopping them going off to taking their spend to another brand. So there's definitely. So my point about I think if you look at the brands who do the best job of that, they're the ones in many cases who are masters of their own customer data better than others. And and if you think about in the type of profile of business that we deal with, there's usually two parts of the business that are dealing with customers. There's, if you like, a customer service operation, and then there's marketing. And both of those functions will have quite rich customer data, but for different purposes. So I think what we're seeing and what we're observing is the convergence isn't just between contact center and CRM and customer experience AI technologies. It's actually a functional convergence within the customers that we deal with, where all the departments that carry significant customer data are trying to figure out how they pull that data, as in POOL, push that data together, so that they can start to join up the dots for their customers in terms of a joined up customer experience. So you don't feel that often very disjointed experience you get between the part of the business that sold you something and the part of the business that has to account manage your relationship with them, whether it's groceries, whether whatever it is, whether it's a mobile phone. So I think the markets are converging because the functions are converging. In not everywhere, but in many places, we see that. And I think that the companies that are doing the best job of that are generally the companies that are winning, because they're providing a more joined up experience. I think the other so there's a customer perspective on it. There's an industry perspective on it, which is these companies are actually investing in one another. I don't know if you saw the news only a few days ago, I think, around Salesforce leading a 500 million investment round in Genesis, which Salesforce partner of ours, Genesis partner of ours. It's interesting. And that was a Salesforce-led round that was also included ServiceNow. Obviously, ServiceNow, great ITSM offering, pushing into the kind of Service Cloud, Service Desk offering as well. Also, somebody we work with, and again, we use all of these companies' products ourselves as well. And Zoom. So you've got Salesforce plus ServiceNow plus Zoom. So CRM, obviously, lots and lots of different clouds and bits to the Salesforce offering now. ServiceNow, ITSM, and Service Cloud. And Zoom, well, talking to you on Zoom, but yeah, obviously collaboration, video, like investing in a contact center company.
Right.
I mean, but it's you go back 5 years, you just would have thought that's like,
insanity.
Because it was it was chalk and cheese. There were these two kind of quite separate industries that occasionally crossed over at the desktop in a contact center, because the customer records might be in the so for 20 years the convergence of the market was screen popping in a desktop based on recognizing a phone number.
Yeah.
And we've been able to do that for 20 years, and not many customers do it. And when you do it well, it's amazing. Like, and I know, we've got customers in the insurance side and the financial services side who use just simple stuff like that to shorten the ID&V process, and just answer the phone and go, "Hi, Jonathan, how are you?" I mean, I don't know about you, but
yeah,
technology to do that has been around. Okay, it's a lot more.
Yeah, exactly.
It's been around for 20 years, but when I actually phone somebody and they do that, I'm blown away by it.
Yeah.
If they then ask me a nice, simple kind of second factor authentication question to really painlessly verify me to
Happy
meet
days.
the standard.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, great, And one of our customers is LV Insurance, and I don't know if you're a customer of theirs. Great products, but they're using a lot of driven by them, but using a lot of tech and ideas we put together. They do an amazing job of that. And actually, I was a customer of them long before I knew about the Sabio job. And when I was kind of evaluating the Sabio job versus some other options that I had, I rang them to renew my insurance, and it was just amazing. I was like, oh, that's so good. And just randomly, and then I happened to be looking at some of the materials, and I saw them as one of the Sabio customers. So you know, I spoke to, before I joined, I spoke to them. I said, do we really do the whole thing, or do we do like a little bit? Or, you know, often in customer lists you find out that you don't, you know, you do a bit of it, but you don't do all of it. But no, we do everything for them, and I'm not the only customer by any means who does it. But I think that the potential, when you bring those elements together, when you bring the customer elements together in the CRM, when you think about automation intelligently as automating, you know, even if they're relatively complex, but interactions like booking a field service appointment, which is a lot more complex than, say, checking a balance, but the ability to automate those things really well, bring that customer data in. So use, you know, if it's a text interaction, use persona-based bots, because you know what age, what gender a customer is, you know whether, you know, so you tailor that automation experience so that people are really comfortable using it, and then you keep your people back for the complex issues, the difficult issues, the urgent issues, the multidimensional issues. It's as those pieces of technology come together, you can deliver the most amazing overall customer experience. So I think we're seeing companies internally, you're seeing that convergence. I think you're seeing the practical convergence of the vendors externally, but you still got quite a significant number of big brands who still deliver a relatively uninspiring customer experience. But I think, like, my hypothesis in all of this is, over the next 5 to 10 years, that's just not going to be okay anymore. It's like it's been okay for the last probably 5, 10, 15, 20 years. You could kind of get away with it, you know, if you had a really good product. But I think that the way the market's converging, the demands of the customer, the fact that the customer is probably remote, they're not going to, you know, and intolerance, switching speeds, you know, low barriers to switch companies that you procure stuff from, whether it's your groceries, whether it's whatever it is, whether it's insurance, you know, the switching hurdles are coming down all the time. The ability to exert your normal kind of market influence as a big brand, that's dropping. So, you know, you can get digital natives just come out of nowhere and eat your market. So I think the battleground is customer experience, and those that do a better job of that will win. And you know, there's been quite a lot of research recently that shows various different specific papers on it that were an actual kind of numerical analysis of the different financial performance for companies that invest in customer experience and those that don't. I'm trying to remember. I was looking at this the other day.
I'm right behind you on that as well, by the way.
Watermark Consulting, it was. They did this study on it. Basically, the brands who invest in it are winning. So the brands who see it as a profit center, invest in it heavily, focus on it, think about what it's like for their customers to deal with them. They are winning, and you see the returns. You know, these are publicly quoted companies. And you see companies who try and do it on the cheap, and they are losing market share.
I think as well, when you talked about your experience, and I 100% I'm with you on CX is going to be the differentiator for success and where you choose to do everything. The way you talked about it then is actually really reassuring, that if you focus on customer, but this contact center and empowering people and getting everything right to be able to deliver that full picture, that seamless experience, so that the really helpful data about customers isn't separate to the people that need it on the front lines. It's readily there for them. It's just exactly the way it should be. Now, in terms of that kind of convergence, where's Sabio? Where's your sweet spot in terms of what that looks like?
Well, we kind of think about that as a Venn diagram, basically, with and it's I mean, it's a debate about where you put different vendors, and certain vendors would like to say, well, actually, I'm a contact center vendor as well, because that's a CRM vendor may say, well, I'm a contact center vendor. But the way we think about it is kind of is actually more about where have these companies come from, or where have these capabilities come from. So like, what did they start with? Okay, it might be a service desk or ticketing solution now that's added a CPaaS capability like Twilio or something, so that they've now got voice plugged into their service desk capability. So they can say, like a Zendesk voice, which is based on Twilio. So they can say, well, we're a contact center, and you can use it as a contact. Like, it's a great product, but that isn't where they came from. That's like the core. It's not the DNA. So I think you've got to look at the DNA. The way we think about it is we create these kind of three circles: the partners that we work with, the issues that we're dealing with, the departments that we're working with in our customers, and we kind of group the issues and the partners and the solutions into these three pots based on where they came from, not necessarily where they want to go, because they all want to go into that place in the middle where when you bring these three circles together, where they interconnect. So we think about, like, what's your real strength? Like, if you strip it away at the core, are you an AI company? Are you a CRM service desk company? You're a contact center company who came out of voice and then went into multi-channel. So because they can all do 90% of what customers want to deliver that differentiated. The thing is, it will feel like a different thing to live with. And it will particularly, not just for the customers, it will particularly feel like a different thing to live with for the people who work in the contact centers. Like those choices which are kind of made, back to your point about getting that information together, that old classic about, oh, sorry, my systems are running slow today. They're not running slow, right? It's the time it takes me to alt tab between like 5 different green screen to find the data that I need to scribble it on a post-it to be able to give you the answer that you want. Those decisions, they're not arbitrary, and obviously there's serious people making those decisions, but like those decisions kind of affect literally the mental health of the people that work in those contact centers, because
100%.
Because if you get that wrong, and it's and people get sucked into whatever the idea of working with a particular vendor or working with you've got to really think about what it's like, because the people that work in those contact centers, they are now the brand ambassadors for those companies. So the way we think about it, Martin, we put those things in those pots. We think about the issues. We work with the customers to try and understand what their goals are in terms of customer experience. We use the tools that we've got to actually try and shine some insight on very quickly, on whether or not the experience that the customers are getting is the one that our customers think they're projecting or they want to project. And sometimes there's a massive gap between what the impression that the client thinks they're giving and the experience that the customer is getting. And sometimes actually it's quite a small gap, and it can vary from one channel to another, or from one kind of function or one process to another. But so we try and close that gap between perception and reality. And then we just try and understand the direction that the customer wants to go in the long term, where they want to be, like what's the end point, and then just work back. But be really clear about it. For that kind of profile of customer that I'm talking about, with a lot of customers to manage, whether that's a startup that started 3 years ago, has raised a ton of money, has suddenly got 500,000 customers, is going to be 2 million in 3 years' time, or whether that's a company that's been around for 30 years, which is the name or the brand in that market, predominantly in Europe, we operate globally, but we're focused primarily in Europe. We want everybody just to know that we've got the best people, we've got the best ideas, and actually, as a specialist, we're the best partner in that space, right? Obviously, we're not the biggest services company in the world. Like, you can go to an Accenture, you can go to an IBM, or you can go to a CAP, but they won't specialize like we will in that space. Yes, of course, they'll have big functions, and equally there'll be other smaller specialist players in our space who are really good in a particular niche. But I think our focus, our differentiation is at scale, being able to bring those kind of three worlds together and to help our customers unpick what their choices are and make conscious decisions, because there is no perfect choice, right? Whatever route you go down, technology-wise, to underpin the business strategy and the customer service strategy that you've got, those choices that you make now are going to impact on the customer service that you deliver over the next 2, 3, 5, 10 years. And for us, it's just about helping our customers understand the different, because they've got so much choice, understand the different choices that are out there. And then once they've selected that path, delivering it for them and making it successful quickly. And I think that's one of the other things that we're really obsessed about, is really, really kind of quick returns. That's why we don't really like generally to get, if we can, I mean, we have to, but we'd much rather do a proof of concept quickly than get engaged in a kind of a 2-year sales process, and for that, a massive tender. We'd rather just come in and say, right, okay, we can have this thing. As an example, we can have it up and running in a week or two and show you practically what we mean. And if you don't like it, great. We're not great, but not ideal. But at least rather than these great big waterfall projects that you sign a 3-year contract and you're 2 years into it and you haven't even gone live. I mean, that's
well, I was going to say,
doesn't make any sense.
Surely that suits the market. I mean, we're from my background, like operations, where we want to do things quick. We want to get kind of the solution. We want to put out the fire and be better.
Yeah.
It seems to me that's definitely the right approach. Do you find, you mentioned something there about this kind of just like dizzying amount of choice that people have, and do you help customers kind of stay on track in terms of what's important? Because people could be charging 1,000 different windmills through, let's get this bit of technology, let's get that, because a lot of the things that people have in-house are organically grown, like a patchwork quilt of stuff. Do you help kind of clarify that in terms of, right, I love the way you talk about the 3 kind of Venn diagrams. That must be quite reassuring for your customers, or your customers of your customers.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the 3 circles in the Venn diagram, I think that's a way. It's just a simple visual tool for help customers kind of understand. When they're getting pitched directly by vendors, and they're all saying they do the same thing, but they come from different, originate in different markets. It's to help them kind of pick that apart. But actually, I think to arrive at that decision and what the right trade-off is, there's a couple of things that we really, and I'm not just saying this, we genuinely try and do, and it's kind of part of our strategy. It's part of our values. It's part of our internal vision for the company that we want to be. And we want to advocate on behalf of our clients' customers, on behalf of them as a stakeholder group, and advocate on behalf of their contact center, the people that work in their contact centers. And we want to bring the requirements of those 2 groups, so our clients, anyone that works across delivering customer experience for the clients, but particularly where that intense environment, the contact center, and their customers, and bring their needs to the heart of the decision-making process between the different things that are on the table. So don't just think about the typical things that you might think about what's it going to feel like. Like, go work in one of your contact centers for a day and understand what it feels like to use the current set of systems, and then think what it's going to be like to deliver a good customer experience. think about the choices you're making in terms of what that means for that person. Think about what it means for the supervisor. Trying to manage resources. I mean, with the Omicron outbreak, from a scheduling perspective, supervisor, it must be a nightmare at the moment. And okay, it may be easier because a lot of people are remote, but I know that some customers have gone back to their contact centers, they're having to go back remote. But even if they're remote, there's going to be a lot of people, hopefully, obviously not seriously ill, but there's going to be a lot of people at least off work who can't work. So think about things like that. Think about these kind of existential pressures and challenges, and which you can never have predicted. The solution that, when you're choosing between the solutions, think about the impact on those key stakeholders and think about the impact on the customer. And then the other thing, which I'm genuinely kind of excited about, is that we're thinking hard about, is also trying to lay out the different, and you might laugh at me about this, but the different carbon footprint of the different solutions.
Oh, definitely not laugh.
One of the things that's often not really considered is what is, and we're really genuinely obsessed about that. It's kind of part of our strategy. We really want to try and just do the right thing and just be conscious of it and try and do a better job. And that's reflected sometimes in some of the conversations we've had as we've unlocked this year. It's like, can we talk about how we physically meet? Like, we do need to physically meet with our customers, but rather than having last minute random meetings with people missing, let's build a schedule for the year, so that we can be effective, and we can kind of minimize the carbon footprint of some of these meetings. If you've got a customer, we've got international customers, offices in APAC, offices in Europe, offices in the States, and you're trying to get everyone together globally. You have to fly, right? There's just no practical solution. So let's try and be smart about how we do that. And let's think about, and I think the same thing applies for the technology solutions, right? They do definitely, on-premise, private cloud, public cloud, a hybrid of those three. They have different implications in terms of engineers driving around the country. They have implications in terms of, and public cloud doesn't always mean good, as we know from things like Bitcoin and, kind of processing power. I think it's just kind of raising that perspective up as well, is another thing, just to kind of, probably a slightly alternative, just things to consider. They may not ultimately drive the solution that somebody would select, but they're things that we try and bring into the mix to help people find their way through. And I find increasingly when we deal with, with our largest customers, a lot of whom are public, the execs in those companies have all got ESG components to how they're measured. Whether that's sustainability targets, whether that's actually diversity, inclusion, equality targets to what they do. And so I think we try and bring those factors in, or try and illuminate those factors to help our customers make the decision, an informed decision about what the right route is for them. But there is no, every customer is different. Every customer's got a different spin on it, and we're not. The reason we work with a broad range of partners, of technology partners, is because we want to be able to customize solutions to be exactly what is the best fit for our customers.
I absolutely kind of virtual high five you for, again, if I was an employee,
do that.
I would.
You have to put the, you have to do the reaction, don't you? Yeah. Or is there, no, the thumb.
There is, yeah.
And that's a great time. It's a different thing, isn't it?
There we go.
That's like talk.
Yes, Jonathan. Virtual high five, because I think, again, if I was an employee, just to hear that is now a factor in the solutions that you deploy, so consideration would make a big difference, because people are deciding to join companies based, and these are kind of decision making factors around what's the company view on the climate, what's the company view on diversity and inclusion, where do you stand, what is it important to you? And I think if what you just said there, evidence is it absolutely is, then I think that's brilliant, because I'd never even considered before distance engineers travel? What does it mean? Those kind of things. I think it's great.
I want to be completely clear. I would say only about 10% of the proposals we produce currently have that in, but I'm completely committed to that being 100%, within a year or two. And
Right.
that's about baking it into the systems. It's about baking it into the configuration tools that you use internally. But that hasn't stopped us from already talking to customers about, have you thought about that aspect? Like when you're making this decision, have you thought about, that's another perspective, along with the stakeholder, their customers, the people that work and run their contact centers. If you think about it from multiple different perspectives in order and to make your choice.
And do you think, you mentioned around kind of agents of the future, that's been something that's kind of been talked about for a while, around agents will deal with more complex queries from customers to deliver true kind of CX and those kind of wow moments. Does the kind of technology that you guys and some of the people you have there make that more likely to be a reality in the next few years? Because it is something that's been mentioned for a long time, agents of the future. And
yeah, I mean, no, 100%, absolutely. And I think, there's multiple components to that and multiple kind of definitions of that agents of the future, right the way through to people saying, well, it's a bot and it's personalized, which we are automating some, as I said, some really quite complex voice interactions, like booking a field service appointment, really successfully in some of our own IP for customers, and actually getting really good feedback from our clients' customers. We're getting and actually getting really good feedback also from the people, their customer contact center reps, because they didn't like doing those things anyway. They were kind of like one of the more irritating and repetitive parts of their job. So they're quite happy to have
great
things removed. But to your point, we're not seeing agent numbers go down. We're seeing them go up.
Mm.
And what we are seeing is we're seeing minutes, talked minutes or chatted minutes hold or go up, but the number of individual calls is coming down. So people are busier, but on longer, more complex calls. So, the way we think about that and what's happening there in terms of that, we describe it, that the changing role of humans in all of this.
Yeah.
It isn't just about the technology, right? First of all, there is a which is why we've also been building out kind of consulting side of our business that looks at the processes that underpin the interactions in the contact center. And I'm sure you're familiar with the term baggage handling. Are you familiar with that? Sure you would be. So I think, first of all, you have to work with a client who is comfortable to break down those functional silos and allow the people that work in their contact centers to handle, if it's a billing problem or it's a product problem or a returns problem, it doesn't matter. Like you don't not having to say, well, I need to transfer you off to this other department. So I think that's step one, and to really deliver really good outcomes for customers, I think you have to empower the people that work in your contact centers to be able to baggage handle kind of cross-functionally, cross-process. Assuming that you're working with a customer that's prepared to do that, and not all of them are a client, so then there's all sorts of stuff you can do, whether it's focusing on, if you like, the desktop, the surfacing of customer information. We were talking about the role of CRM in that. Sorry, lift my lights on again. Oh, it's going to drive me mad. And we have another piece of tech. This is an idea that's been around for ages, but making it work is quite hard. But it's amazing when it does, which just listens to the conversation in real time, and then prompts a thing called Agent Assist, and then it prompts the knowledge base or the application and serves up what it considers to be relevant information to the agent of, if you like, similar case closures or a returns document or So it's just listening all the time, just chuntering away, like in a window, popping up
That
things
sounds great.
might be useful. So, and that's, again, I mean, the stuff that you can do now, the kind of the rise of AI and automation because of the commoditization and the reduction in cost of the computing power and improvement in the NLP engines, natural language processing engines, and yeah, it's nuts. It's incredible, and that's being driven a lot by the really big. You know, it used to be kind of a specialist. I think there always will be specialist AI vendors where you want to go really deep on a particular topic, but what you know, the big players, the Googles and so on, Amazons, Microsofts, who are all their engines, incredible. Actually, they go very broad. They don't necessarily go to that specialization, but their ability to act as a triage at the front end, understand, you know, a very wide range of, understand what they're hearing and then prompt accordingly. So yeah, so I absolutely, I think to answer your question, technology does help with that, but I think it's as much a mindset for the customer that you're working with, the client that you're working with, and whether or not they really do want to break down those functional and process silos in their contact center. If they don't, then it's yeah, I don't think you can achieve the same results.
Conscious of time, but I know this is I mean, this has been fascinating. I think there's so much that I want to ask you, and we can do more of. I think this is thankfully the end of part one. Not thankfully it's the end, but it's only part.
I was really enjoying that. No. I'll take that slightly personally. But, yeah.
What I meant was there's a part two.
I do talk a lot. I'm sorry. You're not the first person to tell me.
It's perfect for a podcast that you talk a lot. What I meant was I'm thankful that there's a part two.
Oh, good.
I know we've got more time next week, and there's so much in this. It's great for you to give up your time and to kind of share some of those thoughts. I found it fascinating. So I can't wait to listen to.
You don't have to thank me. I mean, it's great. I love talking about this stuff, as I said, and I can't go home and talk about it because everyone just looks at me like I'm weird.
Yeah, I get the same thing. There's
quite a small group of people on the planet that get excited about the same stuff. So
yeah,
we're one of them. So I like hanging out with.
There's a moment. There's a moment with my wife where I can see, okay, I've talked too much about something about contact centers that's excited me, and she's like, I love you dearly. I'm not with you on this one. Yeah. Jonathan, thank you very much.
Well, thank you.
And we'll speak again.
Great, thanks.